Okay, my opponent stated that Americans do want the flat tax because a couple of states out of 50 have chosen to do their state taxes. When you compare taxes to California and the federal tax, you're talking about a much smaller tax amount, and most people probably wouldn't complain about making that simpler because it's a much smaller effect on their taxes. Next, he stated that for businesses, it was much simpler for large businesses to account for the employees instead of having to have lots of paperwork and so on. But in actuality, while it might be much simpler for large businesses, which is probably not true, they'll have to keep most likely the same records they've always kept. Small businesses will take the brunt of the change because, for example, in the AICPA Understanding Tax Reform, they state that many current law issues would remain problematic under flat tax, such as the lack of a bright line between business expenses and personal consumption for self-employed individuals. So it's going to make small businesses have a much more complicated time deducting things and knowing where things go. Richard Murphy, again, in Flat Tax is not as simple as they had you think, says, far from reducing burdens, flat tax would increase the burden of taxation administration for almost all small businesses precisely because it will require two forms of accounting which will confuse and annoy them. Large businesses may find the process somewhat easier, but they should expect very few savings. So the claim that it would be better for businesses is false. In their original argument, they stated that it was much simpler. Assumably, that was the reason to change. And also, again, in Understanding Tax Reform, the AICPA notes that the complexities of the Internal Revenue Code has arisen over almost 90 years in response to changing public policy and goals and revenue demands. Assuming that similar adjustments would not befall an otherwise simpler flat tax would be naive and imprudent. So as Valentina said, this is basically a change to our system that we have. It's not enough difference, and by the time we get done with it after a few years, it will probably be just as complicated. And again, our opponent has not given a good reason to change to begin with, to deal with that. Finally, I just want to mention that they mentioned that it works well in other countries. And as for Russia, which was mentioned earlier, who seems to have benefited from the flat tax it's a really long thing. In a flat tax reform feasible in a grown-up democracy of Western Europe, a simulation study for Germany by Faust Felchens. I can't say that name. Another robust result seems to be that flat tax reforms will increase the tax burden of the middle class. This is important from a political economic perspective. A strong and politically powerful middle class is characteristic of most European countries. This suggests that a series of difficulties for flat tax reform face grown-up democracies of old Europe. And we're much more like the grown-up democracies of old Europe than we are like Russia. Also, a quick note, part of Russia's big reform was the fact that during the same time they went to flat tax, they also began forcing more people to comply with taxes, which they hadn't done in the past. And that could have a big point in why their tax collection was raised so high. Thank you.